Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of Syncing with ServiceNow. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Fred Reynolds and Kristin McDonald with us. Kristin and Fred, ladies first. Kristin, how's it going?
Great. How are you doing today, Andy?
Oh, tell the truth. We already talked about it.
I am on the tail end of COVID, so apologies if my voice is a little bit off today.
Well, the voice isn't great, but it's fine for this. We don't care. How's the symptoms? I know when I sound like that, I've usually got a sore throat to go with it, and I'm a big baby with a sore throat.
No, outside of the sound, I'm actually quite fine today. But thank you. Okay.
And we talked about it a little bit before we hit the record button. You've had a couple times, and that's good for you to get through it and keep going, and at some point you're going to be immune to the whole thing.
Hopefully so.
It's going to be like the common cold. The only problem with that is I'm a big baby with the common cold too. So.
Okay.
Fred, how many times you had COVID?
Once that I know of, probably 2 or 3 times that you just got a cold and you got to assume it's one or the other. But at some point, I'm like you guys. I mean, what's the point of go get tested? I mean, the first time I had it made me a little nervous. Had high temperatures like for 2 days, turned into a big baby too, Andy. But I think that's just a guy thing. We turn into babies. We can't take it. But I've had probably more of a sinus thing this year that just can't seem to shake it. I guess from all the flying. But if it was, I know that we had lots of people at SCO that had it as well. And I think when I came back, I was feeling a little under weather. But it's just one of those things at this point. I think it's got to come and go. But it is bad that it seems to attack your voice and got to keep some hot fluids on your throat.
Well, and to be clear, we're not trivializing it. It's just
it's
how this human world we live in works, and
yeah.
I hate that it impacts some people so much more ferociously than others. But we'll get through it.
No, it's nothing to downplay. I've certainly lost people due to it, but I think it's just one of those things these days we've kind of learned how to cope with it, right? You're not sure what it is, but can't spend every day going and getting tested, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, thanks for joining. You were gracious enough to earlier today put in a topic for today, and I'm going to share my screen. But the topic, the blog that we're reviewing today says 6 steps to better infrastructure visibility. And this is from February of 2023, February 9th. And this is written by, Matt Gawarty, I think is how you say it. Guys, why did you pick this one? And, what is the concept that we're reviewing here today?
Well, I'll try to keep Kristin's talking to a minimum until we need her, because it can be a good technical conversation I think we'll have around this. I think it's a great conversation. It's actually very relevant to a couple of customers we're helping today, Andy. And it was the baseline of what brought me to choose ServiceNow to start with, and the whole premise around it, creating a solid CMDB, which is what we'll talk about today, and create that better visibility. I was telling Kristin before you got here, Andy, we were just chit-chatting that as we get down into this a little bit more, one of the steps is something hindsight 2020, right? I think that's a great thing about us now on the partner side from where I was, is now I get to take my experience and talk to a new customer about, hey, if you're just starting off and you're doing this, here's the real things to focus on. And as we get to some of those in those 6 steps, Andy, I'll talk more about it. But I think it's pertinent to everybody who has ServiceNow or looking to try to understand how to better get a watchful eye on their landscape of the infrastructure and services that it impacts us. And I think that's more what this is about, is understanding the services, the service levels to your infrastructure. Because everything is
how do you run how do you run and manage your IT department? And I think for a lot of people, and now that we're having more and more of these conversations, they've got a whole bunch of disparate tools. They're trying to run something, in this case an IT department, with a whole bunch of different tool sets that maybe overlap and don't communicate with each other.
And a lot of these common tool sets want to kind of create the same thing. They want to say, I'll go get your inventory and I'll keep it within this tool so I can do these certain tasks. But that's not very helpful to everything else in the grand scheme of things. And if you think about infrastructure, which I know you have tons of experience in that play, and now we've got hybrid models, but an EX host holding VMs, and those VMs may have multiple applications. So what happens with a VM goes down, how does all the applications or the IT owners of those business applications get notified, right? That's how it just starts to, when I mean business services, is kind of how it all comes together. What's the visibility of that infrastructure?
Right. Kristin, why did you and Fred think, why did you pick this one?
The CMDB is so central to any IT help desk solution. As your engineers are working their tickets, they have to be able to see what you've got in your environment. And ServiceNow has some amazing, powerful tools in terms of seeing across your platform, seeing the relationships between devices, seeing that mapping across services, and really helping the engineers to pinpoint where you have issues. And just to expand a little bit on what Fred was saying, even if a customer has tool sets in their environment, many times what we'll see is that the engineers working tickets or managing devices aren't actually using the tool sets. And you've got spreadsheets here and spreadsheets there and a tool set over here and maybe another tool set over here that's capturing a handful of devices. And there's nothing consolidated, nothing centralized. It really does make things difficult for the engineers who are just trying to troubleshoot problems.
It does.
Sure. I asked one of our guys who runs our internal IT one time, why are we spending all this money implementing ServiceNow? And he said, for security reasons. Like, what are you talking about? And this, I didn't even know what the SecOps was at the time, but his point was, if you can't get your hands and your eyes and your head around what you have to manage, then you can't secure it because you didn't know it exists. And as you guys are talking about here, you're bringing all that maybe from multiple different platforms into one place where you can then get your control over what you have and then make intelligent decisions around how to manage it. That caught me off guard, the way you answered that question, but it makes tons of sense.
Yeah.
So CMDB, I think if I've heard Fred say CMDB one time, I've heard him say it 1,000 times. And I came into this talking ITIL and ITSM, not CSM, customer service management, and CMDB, which I have to look it up every single time, what the configuration management database. All right, so what is this all-important CMDB thing about?
So, Chris, let me go, because I'll let Kristin educate me on the technical side of it, right? But the importance of that configuration management database, Andy, is to also understand what makes it up, right? And I think Kristin can help break some of that down. But to me, when we were building it, it was about the configuration items that are in there. And a configuration item, much like the old platforms I came from, Andy, or the spreadsheets, they're one-dimensional. They just kind of have a device to an IP address or whatever. This is a different concept. This is more like building blocks. A configuration management database should have a bunch of configuration items, and those configuration items all come together to provide a service, or is all running on one type of, maybe from one IP address. So that's the difference here. It's a combination of those. And that's why the first part of this 6-step, I guess, article that we're looking at here, the blog, is consolidating that CMDB. And the consolidated CMDB means to take all of these different items or elements within your infrastructure, again, whether that's a service, whether it's an application, whether it's a physical server, whether it's something on the cloud, and adding that to configuration management database in such a way so they all become an individual thing, like a CI with its own identity, so we can go further into this mapping process. So Kristin, how was that? How did I do with that?
You did great, Fred.
Good.
So I hear this and I think about my early days of, my second generation of learning to program a little bit around object-oriented programming, where you had an object and it had features and properties, and being able to take one object and associate it with others and bring its features and properties to the mix. Is that kind of what this is all about?
In a way, but in regards to devices. And within the ServiceNow CMDB, you can allocate specific properties to device types. So for example, when you're looking at a server, you're going to capture the OS, you're going to capture the CPU, the disk usage, things of that nature. Whereas for software, you may have some different attributes there. So it really is customized to the CI type. ServiceNow has over 100 CI types out of box. I forget the latest count, but they continue to add to them. That is one of the strengths of the ServiceNow platform, as I believe we've mentioned before. They're constantly innovating, constantly improving. So yeah.
And those device types, Andy, so like, as you said, there's bunches of those, right? And to go back to your SecOps comments and why they look at it for security, because of those types, there'll be some defined ones that you can capture, but you can expand on that if there's certain things you're looking for. And that's why it's important, because when she mentioned applications, you'll be looking at the versions, and it may not be one version, it may be your dot releases in certain ones. And so when something attacks a company and looks for a particular version of that, that's when you can quickly go and put that into your ServiceNow and say, hey, go look at my database and look for that version for anything and come back. That's how you would instantly know, and this is what helps with SecOps, that incident vulnerability response. Do I have a vulnerability? What is it? Identify it for me and show me the list of those assets. If those assets and those things are not part of your CMDB, then good luck going looking through your spreadsheets and see if you have it, right? Quickly.
Or what patch it's
Well,
on.
and I still run into people all the time that have the spreadsheet. And Fred, you mentioned spreadsheets being flat, and they are. I mean, I guess if you were really advanced, you could tie one workbook and tie different sheets together, but that would be insane to try to build your own type of database doing that when ServiceNow has these components that are already in there. Let me ask you guys a question real quick. You guys have been around ServiceNow. The first time you touched ServiceNow or ITSM or customer service, Kristin, back in the day, how many CI types did it have versus the hundreds that you just referenced?
Oh, goodness. I've been working the platform since Aspen. It's been about a decade, so I'm not even sure. I would say definitely in the 30 to 40 range, most likely, but definitely over 100 now by far. Yeah.
My point there is they keep evolving,
Yes.
what's coming out, what exists, and getting, taking properties and features that are associated with that and information you want to have. And, chances are if you've got some in your environment, it's in the ServiceNow platform ready to be, populated.
And Andy, I would tell you that my first experience with it, which Chris was a part of that, right? That was the good thing about it. Learning this is we had over what we considered, close to 1,000 different device types. But you really boil that in. I mean, a server is a server, so that's a device type within ServiceNow. So you may think you have 1,000 different things, but when you really look at the gist of what it is and how you can put it as a type, it starts to shrink that number down. So you don't have to create a lot of ones. So again, they do a good job of out of the box giving you the 80-20 rule, and you shouldn't have to go out and customize much to fit the need.
Mm-hmm.
But if you need to, you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I highlighted the second paragraph under CMDB, and that is, well, first of all, let me tell you the topic. I called it's consolidate your CMDB, which means, we're taking this platform that we have and limiting it down to what makes sense instead of, somebody just randomly, and you can add your own configuration information, but ideally what you need is already in there. And if it's not in there and you're going to create it, there better be a really good reason why you're making changes that aren't going to be just supported in the primary platform. But what I highlighted in the second paragraph is what, at this point, what really matters to me, and that is the idea that multiple groups of people can now rally around this information and have content that makes sense across the spectrum of folks in a department, in this case IT. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters, having people having the ability to collaborate around specific information that is centralized and managed. And, you really, trying to find the word here, but you're not guessing what somebody's configured something to be. It is in the platform, and we've all agreed to it.
And I think a big part of what you've highlighted too is what's above that, being service aware. So it's not so much about building this data model that just says, from a security person, they're going to want to know what's there and a couple of things. From the business, there's a lot more things to know and how that service is affected by another service. And on applications, you may have 30 services running on one box, right? So how does that affect the others when it goes down? And most services are built off of other products and services. I mean, so it can get very complicated. So I think it's very important. And that's why I think as we get into some of, especially number 2 here, I'm getting a little ahead, but that's why it's important to, and why I love ServiceNow, because it's not just for IT, it's for IT, the business units, and it's for the whole company from that aspect that's impacted by something.
Yeah, these same concepts go across the entire business these days. And I think that's been one of the interesting things for me to learn about ServiceNow is, okay, great, it was invented to help you have standards and run your IT department, but guess what? Those same concepts apply to every other department in the company.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And potentially to services, going back to your words, Fred, that you're offering to external people, including customers.
Right.
All right, so before we move on from CMDB, anything that else you guys would want to bring up around that? Because this is the foundational piece for I think everything else we do in ServiceNow. This is what makes it the platform of platforms, isn't it?
It is, but my only point would be is if you were looking at this, looking to get ServiceNow or invested in ServiceNow, I think the first step is to really look and see, have I really truly consolidated my CMDB? What do I have out there? Even if it's an application, a very useful tool that you never plan to displace, you need that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't consolidate to the CMDB so you get more out of a central repository for that information. So just want to make that point.
Yep. I can't believe I'm going to do this, but this is what came to my mind. It's like transportation systems, train system or a bus terminal, for example. If I can get everybody into one place, then I can make intelligent decisions about getting the most people to the right places next.
Absolutely.
All right, next one here and I'm not sure I read the title properly earlier, 6 steps to better infrastructure visibility. The next one is prioritize business use cases. Kristin, you want to take that one first?
Sure. Prioritization is so important when you're doing these implementations, but particularly in regards to CMDB and building out your CIs and services, just because so many companies have just these massive amounts of devices and several, tens or in some cases even hundreds of services that they're providing to both their internal teams and possibly also external customers as well. So just being able to prioritize that and say, okay, these are our critical services. These are the things that really make a difference, allows us to focus on that. We can implement that first, make sure you're getting some value out of the implementation as you continue down the path and start implementing some of those lower priority services. So prioritization is incredibly important for a new implementation. Yeah.
Brett, your thoughts?
Yep. Sorry. What did you say, Andy? Oh, you said my
your
thoughts?
On this.
Sorry.
Yes.
Didn't hear you. I kind of blipped there. No, I agree. I mean, I think that was one thing I was talking to Kristin about when I first looked at implementing ServiceNow. This was a kind of a part that I really didn't think about as deeply. I just thought about let's cram and let's get everything in there as fast as possible, especially when you look at doing migration. I think it's extremely important to really think about the use cases around it. What's your intentions for it? How do you really want to organize this? Already thinking about the services are affected by everything that you're adding to it, right? And do you really have a particular application or a physical device, virtual device? Do you really have it well thought out as to every little piece of information you could use from that and how it affects other services? So I think it's a really place that people don't spend a lot of time to think through, but I think it's the most value. When we think about, having it just as a ticketing system, Andy, which a lot of people think of ServiceNow being, this is where it changes the game on just being a ticketing system, because this is where you truly get your automation and your ROI out of a platform like this. The more well-defined you make your CMDB and the business processes around it.
So, in the engagements I've been on so far, including our own internal, it always starts around customer service and help desk tools. Is that a really good place to start? Does that set people up for success, or are there other areas that should be considered first?
It really goes back to the customer's needs, right? Where are their business priorities? What are their business goals? What are they trying to achieve with their ServiceNow implementation? Quite a few customers begin with the help desk. That's a pretty standard place to start. But if your business goals are not aligned with that, maybe the customer focus is more important at the moment. You've got a decent help desk tool. We can focus on the CSM side and save the help desk for a little bit later. So it really does depend on the customer's implementation and their priorities. And
it could be what we're seeing now with security. Everybody's so security conscious and choosing to make ServiceNow more of a central point of that. And that would change the conversation there, because it's not so much of your IT help desk, but it's your security team understanding and getting awareness of what's there and how to do vulnerability response to that. And that would be a separate team.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe a good way to say it is, pick your use case for what's going to have the greatest impact, but also as you're doing it, make sure you're not limiting your path forward in the way you set it up.
Yep, absolutely.
Plus, I think, too, Andy, just one last thing on that. You may be looking to implement it for a certain area. Maybe it is IT help desk, right? But I think that's when the initial conversations that we can add value to, let's think about it a little bit bigger. Let's think about the future. Let's take a 30 minutes to an hour, talk about all the different use cases you can come up with today if this information was there, just so you have it from the beginning, because that would help somebody like Kristin design and understand how to set up your data model to best benefit and not be hindsight down the road. So that was kind of the point I was making. I don't want to miss that point, right? I learned through this process, and Kristin probably was telling me this in the very beginning of what we did in our implementation, but it may just went out one area out the other, right? I was ready to just get and bang it in. But I think it's very important to understand the full spectrum of what you want to do and what you can do with it, and have somebody tell you what you can do with the system before you move into that place. Because the hardest thing is to go back and continue to work and make changes once you're live. And it can be a little dangerous to do so, right? A lot of changes while you're live. So again, well thought out seemed to be to start with.
So, Kristin, I think Fred just said he didn't listen. Is that true?
Very much so.
This is recorded, right?
It is, for the world to know.
Yeah. I'm sure it wasn't the first time. All right, number 3, adopt a phased plan of attack. Fred?
I think this is probably just saying that once you understand some of your strategy, what you want to do, a lot of this can be very overwhelming. If you're looking at creating this, you may have multiple spreadsheets, a lot of different data sources. And for that, I think you have to think about what's your biggest use case. What are you trying to solve first? Don't try to tackle it all at once. Once you have a solid model, you can just keep picking apart the different spreadsheets, create automated imports in for that. Kristin's done that a lot, right? You create the import so you can actually drive it into your CMDB, and then other tools. Of those tools, what information do I need? I don't need everything that's in there because it's used for that tool, and that tool is going to exist. So let's use what's in that tool, pull out what's relevant into our CMDB, and populate that. And I think again, making a phased plan so you don't get overwhelmed to start with and make quick mistakes because you try to drive everything in there too quick. And again, that can be. To my defense, right? I had a timeline. So whether I listen or not, I had a very strict timeline and I had to get there. So we tried to be as methodical as possible, but sometimes you don't have the choice of driving everything there. But again, I think it's really phase it out and pick and choose the things that's going to give you the biggest, quick, what I say, I guess, the biggest bang for your buck, right? The time spent.
And I think we actually went through that this morning, right? We were talking about our implementation, our customer success implementation, our customer service CSM implementation, and we put a kind of a capstone, I guess. So we put an end point on the current project, and then we immediately opened up another project because it's going to be done in phases, and we got to have milestones to measure our success. Kristin, great example from your past around customers who did it in phases and customers who didn't.
Well, I would say any customer that, and going back to Fred's point, any customer that really takes the time to think through what they're going to need and plans out a roadmap is really going to be more successful than a customer who tries to just take one priority and then, okay, what's the next urgent thing on the plate? Because then you're going to get blown by the winds of who's screaming loudest. But if you take the time up front, really plan it out, map out that roadmap, and that's actually something we're working with one of our clients on right now, is developing out their roadmap. We actually reviewed that with them last week. To really phase it out and plan it out so that they know exactly what they're getting, when they're getting it, and it's not blown by the winds of change. So, yeah.
Well, and that's a really good point too, is there's lots of squirrels that run by, I'm sure, and all of a sudden you say, oh, wait a minute, we can need to solve that. And like, oh, wait, and and you just kind of got to force folks not to chase the next thing that might pop up. All right. Automate infrastructure discovery. Now, is that something you would typically? Well, let's talk about the topic. Then I want to ask a few questions. Kristin, you want to take that first one?
Absolutely. Automation is such an important thing to look at. It's not going to be for every company. There may be certain companies that are smaller. They don't have many devices that they're managing. Maybe they're not in the cloud at the moment, so it doesn't really make sense for them. But most customers, I would say, would absolutely benefit from automated discovery. You look at, again, these spreadsheets, these manual processes where people are just manually typing in updates to these devices as they complete change requests, as they patch these servers and do these things to them, as things are shifted in and out of a data center, and it's all manual. But when you have automation in place, you're first off taking some of that workload off of your teams, because then the tool sets can actually discover those things. Secondly, it's much more accurate because you're not prone to human error. You're not waiting for somebody to update the record. You've got these discovery tool sets from ServiceNow, or there are other tool sets that can also feed into the ServiceNow data center, the ServiceNow database. And they're actually automatically detecting the real-time status and nature of your infrastructure. It's really quite powerful.
Yeah. Fred, any comments on this?
Yeah, I would say, to me, I know it may not be for every customer based on the size, and I get that, but to me, it's huge. I guess basically from where I came from, because I had so many things that need to be discovered and so many CIs that need to be created. And the power of the automation did a couple of things. One, it helped with enabling onboarding, right? Even if you think about HR and you want to enable onboarding, then it basically has a lot of tasks in series of that to drive things into your CMDB, create multiple CIs out of a single element that it discovers on the network, because it has multiple things, as we talked about. The further you break it down, the more you can get down to the services that are behind that. I think extremely important. And with the automation around discovery means you can have automation and synchronizing that data and that asset if any change happens going forward. Therefore, you're not trying to guess whether your CMDB is accurate all the time because you have a constant checkpoint there. Again, things you have to create, but if you think through it and know that could be a pain point for you, then creating that automation saves you the time of having to constantly do audits and verifying if that's if it's working. So I think it's extremely important.
Hey, and I want to ask you guys, is it normal to have customers who take multiple discovery tools to see, if one finds things that others don't, or is it typical to have one that you rally around?
So you would typically have one per device type. For example, ServiceNow's tool sets are incredibly powerful in the cloud. So usually it would be ServiceNow's tool set that we would recommend for a cloud-based implementation, but there may be some proprietary software or some specialized software that has its own kind of discovery management tool set. And then that can feed in for those device types into ServiceNow. So it's not unusual to see multiple discovery sources, but they don't usually overlap. Typically, it's one per device type. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Automate service mapping. Fred, you want to take that one?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll take it, but I was talking to Kristin before this, right? This is one thing I wish that I understood a little bit more of before in my previous role as well. I think service mapping is a very powerful thing, Andy. That's kind of understanding where these CIs exist, and when issues or anything happens to a particular CI, what's its effect on other services related to that? So now the automated service mapping, I will have to have Kristin speak to that, because I've never done automation around service mapping. We've kind of done it longhand and sat around and said, hey, I have this product and I know of all of these elements and applications that go on that, so I know the cause and effect of that. And when I say, Andy, being in some complicated a bridging technology or unified communication application, right? Sometimes that's 13 different applications having to work together to make a single call work, right? In that way. And what I mean is, if some service is down as part of that, then every service could be affected. It could be down, and you may have alarms going off everywhere thinking you got some major problem, but it may just be one thing. And this is where it really is powerful, because it could come and say, hey, you have all of these, and because the system is aware that you have 13 applications down, but it was caused by one, then your pie is ready, and you can get your pie out of the oven. But you have 13 applications maybe showing they're down, but it's really caused by one service that may be down, and therefore you can push the noise away, create one incident based on that one service. And so, but the automation of it, I'll let Kristin speak to, because I think that's really neat. So Kristin, why don't you talk about the AI and the automation for it?
Sure, absolutely. So ServiceNow does have a few different mechanisms for automated service mapping. I'd like to start by talking about the top down, because that is by far the most powerful mechanism that they have. Essentially, you would give ServiceNow an entry point to your application. So let's say it's an online web-based application. You give it that URL, and it starts going into your service and detecting the different servers and devices that are underneath that application, and builds out what it calls a service map within the system. And then when an engineer is working a ticket, they can put in the device that they're working on, click a button, and they can see the map of the entire service, and they can see where that one device fits in this overall service map, and how it ties to this application. And it also ties maybe to this load balancer over here. But you can see exactly what's in your ecosystem, how everything relates together. You can also see on these service maps where you have open incidents, where you have open outages. So let's say this device over here is airing out, and you get a ticket for the overall application. Well, you can go look at that service map and see, oh, I've got an outage for this underlying server. Well, of course, the application is going to have issues. So let's relate these two tickets together. When this one's fixed, I know mine will be fixed as well. So there's a lot of power in these service maps.
It sounds to me like it saves a lot of time from creating those child tickets, or just putting other tickets underneath the ones that are active.
Absolutely. And you can trigger proactive alerting, right? So if you have a key device on these service maps that's impacting your overall service, you've got an outage for your service, and that service is something that's underpinning, let's say, a service you provide to your customers, you can create some notification, you can trigger tasks within the system to kick off, to alert people and really be more proactive about what's going on and notifying your customers that, hey, we've got an outage, we're working on it, here's your ETA, that type of thing.
Absolutely.
All right, number 6 says keep your CMDB data up to date. I guess you can only make decisions based on good data that's accurate and relevant and timely. I think this makes just common sense, but why are they calling this one out specifically? Kristin, you want to take it?
Sure, absolutely. So that's where some of these automated tool sets really come to play, because when you're dealing with manual entry for your CMDB and service mappings, again, you're reliant on individuals to do that, and it takes them time to do that. They don't always go back and update the record. So having some of those automated tool sets can really help to keep your data up to date and real time, so that you can see those real time changes. In addition, ServiceNow does have quite a bit of built-in reporting and dashboards, so that your configuration manager can go in on a regular basis and see where you might be missing service maps, where you've got some data that may not be covered currently by your automation tools. So you need to make some updates there. So the dashboards and reporting can really help on that front as well.
Yeah. And Andy, I mean, this is really important, right? I mean, if you build your CMDB, you start populating it, and you get a couple years down the road, ServiceNow does assessments. Kristin, I think we do assessments as well on this. And you can go and look through your assessments and see lots of areas in your CMDB that may not be populated, but yet you have entry points for it. And that's a sure sign that you're going to have issues when your data is not being populated or synced properly, or people aren't populating it as they put it in there. And that's just going to lead to, you know, one, all the mapping that Kristin is related to won't work if you don't have things there and addresses or bad information within your CMDB. It's hard to respond to instances when you have bad information there. So it's really important. I think it's something that has to be thought about way back in step one. When you start to build out and design the model, you should always be thinking about how am I going to keep it updated and how I'm going to keep it accurate, and as much automation to synchronize it, the better.
Yeah.
So guys, I thought about this a while ago. If you are customizing your CMDB, does that mean that the CMDB no longer can be upgraded along the way via the ServiceNow upgrades, or does that just mean that parts of it will, and then the things that aren't part of those upgrades, you're responsible for making sure continue to roll forward?
It's really the latter. Everything that is out of box will be upgraded. Whenever you do an upgrade with ServiceNow, your admins will receive a report of things that fell out of the upgrade because there were customizations, and then you have the opportunity to take that back to out of box or keep the customization. So your admins really have control over what's upgraded there. But with the customizations we typically see with a CMDB or service mapping in those areas, it doesn't typically conflict with upgrades. It's more often than not a few custom fields, you know, maybe a few notifications or custom scripts behind the scenes, but nothing major in terms of customization.
It's a good question, Andy, right? Because that is an area that you want to have some consulting around if they're not familiar with it, as to what should you modify, not modify when it comes to something as important as your CMDB. Adding fields and things such as that is going to be common within the entire platform, but that's easily something once you do a full upgrade. Once you do an upgrade, you can say, yes, I want my fields there. I need those. And those are things you're responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to say that in general, you don't want to add anything, you don't want to do customization, but we, like you mentioned a while ago, 80-20 rule, Fred, you're probably going to have to customize 20% of it. You just got to be aware of what these upgrades how that'll impact them.
And I do just want to clarify, ServiceNow is very careful about configuration versus customization. A lot of what we're talking about here is more configuration. Adding fields is considered configuration. It takes a pretty good bit to get to that customization point, and that customization point is where you really just want to give some thought to the upgrades and how well is this going to upgrade. But I would say probably 90% of what we do on a CMDB or service map would be in that configuration category, not necessarily the customization. Yeah.
You're on mute, Andy. Sorry.
No.
There you go. Yep, you're off.
So we have a construction guy who just showed up and started working, which is fine. Well, guys, we've covered this topic. Now that we've gone through it, any additional reasons why you believe this was important that we covered this blog today?
Additional reasons, I would just re-emphasize, I think it's the foundation of what you're building upon. It's a building block. Think of it that way. You're building muscles, right? You need to drink protein, right, to build those muscles. And for here, if you want to have a solid, healthy ServiceNow implementation and a practice around it, then a healthy CMDB is key.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's a reason it's part of the core platform and not part of a single application within ServiceNow. It's important to the whole ecosystem. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's really good that you said that. So this CMDB is going to be the central location or the central configuration for all the workflows you might adopt in a ServiceNow implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And that's across all departments.
Across all departments, absolutely. So HR, CSM, ITSM, your CMDB as CI and asset data are considered foundational to ServiceNow. Yeah.
And Andy, this is key, especially in the ITSM space. When you hear, ServiceNow making workflow and workflows itself, I mean, this is where a lot of that comes from. Certain CIs may be part of a workflow that's needed for a job task. How do you automate some people's work? It may go down to the CI level across multiple CIs. So it's really important.
Okay.
All
right, guys. Well, I'm glad you brought this one to us today, and I look forward to jumping on and doing another. What do you guys, Fred? What do you have coming up? That you'd want to share with our listeners?
I really want to share where I just came from. So I just went over to the West Coast and met with a lot of ServiceNow younger generation, I would say, for me. Right, I'm a lot older, so it was really neat to see a lot of the ServiceNow, digital sales folks, right? Their knowledge around ServiceNow, their excitement around ServiceNow. I mean, it's such a powerful platform. It's great to see how much ServiceNow is growing and investing in their employees, how excited their employees are. So Andy and I had a lot of time spent with them. It was interesting to share some of my, what they want to call wisdom. I think they were just calling me old, but from my practical experience of using their product, I shared a lot of what I did with the product, and that was really neat because they're talking to first-time customers about why they should get the product. So I shared a lot of why it's really important, what you should tell some of them. So I'm very fired up over it, Andy, just overall coming off of SCO, coming off of that conversation.
Yeah. So would you trade the tech that they get to experience early in their career with the music you got to experience earlier in your life? Which one would you take?
Oh, the music.
Take the music. All right. Kristin, what's going on in your world?
In my world, I am planning a big move soon. So I will be out in San Francisco in 4 weeks. So that's pretty much what's going on with me. Yep.
So by the way, Andy, I was kind of joking. I was just joking, by the way. I'll take the tech, right? They have so much information. So I was just playing with you. I just want to see your face. And definitely take their take. Sorry, Kristin, I thought you may have got that being a joke, but go ahead.
No, I think a lot of people would say, hey, I'll take the music we had versus the tech they have. But it is certainly, I got kids, younger kids. They're getting ready to grow up in a tech world where, we were busy installing servers. They're busy. They're going to be busy taking some of these platforms and making services out of it to change the way the business runs. We have some cool stuff, but they're going to have some really cool opportunities to make a difference.
It's just different. It was kind of funny. We had to explain to them what Citrix was and what it did, right? They have no concept of some of that, which is fine. I was like, kind of mind blown by that, but they blow my mind by things that they know. I just think, I think this spot that they're in right now, and I guess it depends on what genre of music you like, but I tell you, they just have so much at their fingertips to make a difference in corporations today. And I think that's why I'd be excited to be where they are. Like if you tell me start off my career where I was or start off where they are, right? Besides my wife and family stuff, I'd start off right there because they're just in such a sweet spot of exciting times and making a difference in this digital transformation we're going through.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I appreciate you guys jumping on, and I look forward to jumping on, having this conversation or another conversation with you guys in 2 weeks.
Perfect. Get better, Kristin.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, guys.
See ya.
Thank you.
Goodbye.